We'll do our best to practice today, even though all of the monastics are out of town. So if I mess up badly, we'll keep it a secret, right? So today I'm going to talk, continue our series of talks on Venerable Master Shun, who wrote the book, The Way of Buddhahood. So this particular book is something that is very dear to Master Jiru, particularly our teacher here, who has been studying this book for quite some time and inspires us to study it as well. One of the unique things about our practice here at Maba is that we really spend a good bit of time, in addition to meditation practice, we also spend a good bit of time in study. And much of what it is that we begin to study when we first come to our understanding that it would make sense to learn how to decrease our suffering is that we learn the teachings of Xiankuan Buddha, the Buddha of our time, and we really study his words in great detail. And in our study group that's going on currently, studying a sequence of the Buddha's teachings called In the Buddha's Words by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, one of the great translators of the Pali text into English, the original texts of the Buddha, called the Suttas. We're very fortunate that Bhikkhu Bodhi has visited us here, and we look forward to him coming back perhaps next year as well in the summer. So this sequence includes, after we study the text of the words of the Buddha, there's another text called The Life of the Buddha by Venerable Bhikkhu Nanamoli that we study, that goes into more detail about the life of the Buddha and also levels of teaching that are even more precise about how we can develop our own ability to decrease our suffering. And so over the years there have been many commentators after the Buddha, and for our time, Master Shun from the Chinese tradition was one of the more influential of the Buddhist teachers. And a few weeks ago, one of our senior teachers, Sharon, gave an explanation of the life of Master Shun, and last week Caddy gave a talk, kind of a summary of part one of this text. So today, what I was planning on doing was actually doing the opposite of what Caddy did, where she gave more of a survey. I'm going to focus on one particular verse and actually one line of commentary to go into the micro view of one particular aspect of the Buddhist teachings and the commentary of Master Shun and my own investigation into this to some degree. So I'm going to be talking about one particular principle. Master has been really having us study in greater detail the 5 hindrances, and I'm going to talk about one of the hindrances today, which is called the hindrance of sleepiness. So Venerable Master Shun in verse 90 says, to further the study of meditation, one should stay away from the 5 desires and the 5 hindrances. So this is the verse that I'm going to talk about, but specifically the 5 hindrances, and particularly hindrance number 3, which is the hindrance of sleepiness. But first, just to say something about the 5 desires, because whenever a person gives a number attached to something, that always brings about, at least in my mind, well, I want to know what if he just said stay away from the desires, I wouldn't be so curious, but when he says 5 desires, oh, I have to know what the 5 desires are. So these 5 desires all begin with the word appealing. Appealing forms, that's the stuff. Appealing sounds, appealing smells, appealing taste, and appealing tangible objects, our touch, our sense of touch. So forms would be related to the eye. So these are the 5 desires. So we need to be careful about these, because when the mind becomes too attracted to these sense-based desires, then the mind goes wandering off to try to possess them, to connect with them, to form an ego attachment with it, and this leads to suffering. So since we would like not to suffer, it would be good to recognize the method of doing that. So the Buddha, the word Buddha means Buddha from the word bodh, or bodhi, which means to awake. A person is fully awake. So the opposite of fully awake would obviously be asleep. So the hindrance of sleepiness is one of the very important practices that we would wish to accomplish. So the hindrance actually itself, one of the terms that's used is called the word stupor. Kind of like, we're in this stupor. What is the stupor? The stupor is the kind of how it is that the mind has been, we can say, hypnotized by how attractive things are. You know, our sense-based desires. So Venerable Yin says about this hindrance of sleepiness, or stupor arises when the mind sinks and becomes dull as if asleep. And then he says something very important. He says, it comes from a lack of clarity. You should look into what this means. It comes from a lack of clarity. So the 5 hindrances, the first is sense-based desire. And for each one of the hindrances, Venerable Yin gives the traditional antidote of what to contemplate on in order to help us not attach so much to sense-based desires. So sensual desire, this is the desire of how it is that we focus on things as being beautiful or ugly, how we're attached to it, making judgments about it. And in the commentary, Venerable Yin says the most intense of these desires is usually a sexual desire, and that in some of the practices of Taoism and in Hinduism, there's actually been a way of attempting to create some kind of spiritual advancement by practicing sensual desire, and that this is a true perversion of the teaching. And that there are many people in the Taoist and the Hindu tradition who've recognized that and have tried to correct it. In Buddhism, it's a major theme that sense-based desires lead to suffering. So the way to, as the antidote to contemplate, we contemplate on the impurity of the body, the impermanence of the body. How the body is just this thing that at a certain time in life is very young, and then later it gets older, not so real. So we recognize that, so we don't get too attached. And then aversion, which is the second of the hindrances, this is where the mind wanders into being angry, feeling ill will towards others. The antidote for that is to contemplate loving kindness and compassion. So in the Buddhist practice, it's very important because as strong as sense-based desires are, this is one of the most difficult. Even though it's the first of the hindrances, it's one of the most difficult to fully overcome. The one that we usually begin to overcome first is aversion, anger, hatred, ill will. That's where we begin to really make progress. We can see that our mind is not so easily swayed to when things don't go our way, we don't become so angry or hurtful. This is part of waking up. Then the next one is sloth, and the other word that's associated with it is torpor, T-O-R-P-O-R, which is kind of like losing. Sloth is a mental sense of falling asleep, and torpor is the body, just losing energy. And the Venerable Master Shun goes into more depth when he talks about the antidote. He says, brightness, which is the investigation of the meaning of the Dharma. This is the way to attain clarity. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we mean by investigation into the meaning of the Dharma. I'll come back to that. Restlessness and remorse is the fourth hindrance. It's where the mind is scattered and is always looking around for something to amuse itself. And then, so the antidote for that is to contemplate cessation. All things come to an end. And doubt, which is the mind saying, oh, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know if it's worth doing. I don't know if I'll make any progress. Then dependent origination, contemplating dependent origination, which is the links of how one thing leads to another, is the antidote. So each one of these we could spend hours studying, but for our purposes today, I'm going to just focus on Venerable Shun's commentary related to sloth and torpor, and the brightness, which is the investigation of the meaning of the Dharma. So in Chinese, there are a number of words that mean hindrance. Nivarana is the original word in Pali, ancient language around the time of the Buddha. And nivarana means to cover something up. Something is covered over. So the idea is that when we wake up, when we're sleeping in bed, we can look at it from that point of view. Oh, we're asleep in bed, we have our covers over us. I don't know if any of you like to sleep with the covers totally over you. Some people like that. So when we wake up, what's the first thing we do? We have to take the covers off. So this is waking up from this point of view. So there are a number of Chinese words, but for our purposes, just a little bit of understanding of the Chinese term for hindrance. One of the terms is gai, which means an obstruction. It's actually a picture of a covering. The top is a coarse grass that is made into a roof, and then that covers the eyes. So there's a big eyeball at the bottom of the character. This is covering the eyes. And there's another term, zhang, which is, we'll get into a little bit, and then in the Heart Sutra, the character that is used in the Heart Sutra is Wa Ai. So Zhang, in this is actually a picture of a tone or sound, and then there's a screen, so the sound can't penetrate through the screen. So this is another term that, again, kind of covering or muffling. We've all been in a situation where somebody is talking and we can kind of hear a little bit of what they're saying, but there's a screen or a wall and we can't quite make it out. We know that there's something that they're saying, but we can't quite make it out. So another term, Chinese term, Hua Ai, that's used in the Heart Sutra is the line in the Heart Sutra is the Bodhisattva's mind is free from hindrances, and with no hindrances, there is no fear. And again, this means, the term here means thought covering. So the character I in this case is I first tone, not the I love, which is fourth tone. So I first tone is a picture of a stumbling block, something that a person would be walking along and they would stumble over it. And then the Hua is a picture of land, like lands, a lot of territory, and then there's a big eyeball on top of that. And then so it's watching over the land, but here you're stumbling, trying to look at the land, but you fall over. This is, again, the hindrance. So the idea of the land is very important because the land in this situation, has to do with keeping your eye on your lands, means keeping your eye on your sankara. The sankara is your habit energy. So this is the habit pattern that the mind has and creates our karma, our future karma. And so in the last of the 5 remembrances, it said, we inherit the result of our action in body, speech, and mind. Our actions are the ground on which we stand. This is the land on which we stand. So it's good to keep our eye on that, so that the mind, that means being fully awake. So in the ancient terms for the particular hindrance that we're looking at, sloth and torpor, in Pali the word is tinamida, means the mind and body lose energy. It's half-hearted, drowsy, sleepy, lazy, loss of energy. In the Chinese, the word Shun is a picture of the tracks of a wild beast that get lost in a stream, and therefore we can't follow the tracks anymore, they're lost. So we're trying to follow, and the wild beast is kind of important. You don't want the wild beast to get you. If you're in the forest and you lose the track of the wild beast, well, you might become the food. So you have to be aware that this could be dangerous. Another term that's used for sloth and torpor in the Chinese is shuimian, which means hanging of the head and closing the eyes. So you know that when you're sitting in meditation and your head starts going down, your eyes are closed, it's easy to fall asleep. This is a good physical description. So I notice when I come here how it is that my mind's habit energy causes me to not pay attention to what's happening. How my mindfulness is weak. So I've been coming out to Maba for a long time, not since the beginning when Maba started back in '97, but a few years after was my first time here, and I've been practicing here, coming almost every Sunday for 10 years or more. And so every Sunday something happens habitually. I hear the ringing of the bell to bring everyone to the meditation hall for sitting, also later for lunch. So I've been hearing this rhythm of the bell for over a decade. And I just thought it was just very nice that the monastics hit the bell, and it sounded good. You know, when I first came out here, we would chant the Heart Sutra every week on Sunday. Now we do the Heart Sutra for a month and then the Diamond Sutra. And I remember that I would sit and I would chant the Diamond Sutra, and I think to myself, how wonderful it is that the monastics lead us in the Heart Sutra. They must have just a lot of fun making up a new rhythm and melody every week. It sounded to me like a different melody every week for years. And then I remember Venerables were going to go on a trip, and they were going to leave Maba, and they said, well, those of us who were left behind, you can chant the Heart Sutra in Chinese. And I thought, well, I guess we can just make up our own melody, right? And Venerable said, oh no, it's set. And then I started paying attention, and indeed, they would sing it the same way every time. I just hadn't noticed the pattern. My mind was somewhere else. It was wandering off. So for years also, I just thought when they hit the bell, they just made a nice rhythm. They just kind of made it up. Till one day, Venerable Kongshi said, well, I should teach you finally how to ring a bell. This reminded me so much of the moments in meditation, you know, right before you hear the bell. Right when you hear the bell, right beforehand, if you pay close attention, the person ringing the gong here, they do what's called a block. You hear a little tap first. That's to kind of so that when the bell rings, you're not startled. It's not that they've made a mistake, purposeful, and then they hit the gong. So it's out of kindness. So you, at that moment, you can really pay attention to see how much the mind has been wandering. Has the mind been focused, or has it been off wandering somewhere? So when the mind wanders, it wanders into these 5 hindrances. Wanting, aversion, not wanting, sleepiness, restlessness, and doubt. This about covers it. That's what covers the mind. So my mind must have been pretty covered, not hearing this rhythm. So I asked Venerable if she would please send me the sequence, and when she sent me the sequence, she also sent a set of verses. So while they're ringing the gong, they're also chanting verses while they're doing it. I didn't know So she sent me these verses and said that she couldn't quite specifically find them in the sutra, but they were from the Lotus Sutra. So I have read the Lotus Sutra a number of times. These verses did not seem like any verses that I had ever read in the Lotus Sutra, so one night I started reading the Lotus Sutra from beginning to end. The Lotus Sutra is about this thick. It's 28 chapters, and each chapter is between 5 and 10 pages. So you can imagine it took many hours, and I couldn't finish it all in one night. Then the next night and the next night. Never could find the verses. And then I got another email from Venerable Kong. She said, whoops, it's not in the Lotus Sutra, it's in the Vatamsaka Sutra. Well, the Vatamsaka Sutra is this thick, about 4 inches thick. But fortunately, there was a little clue, and the clue that she had given was enough for me to narrow it down, because there were certain chapters that it couldn't have been in, and then there were certain chapters that it could be in, and this one little clue was helpful. So I was able, after just about 10 minutes, to find the verses. And in the Kanzi translation, it goes like this: if people want to really know all Buddhas of all times, they should contemplate the nature of the cosmos. All is but mental construction. Oh. So this, when I read this, I said, oh, this was like a moment of brightness, of clarity, of what the meaning of the Dharma is. If people want to really know all Buddhas of all times, they should contemplate the nature of the cosmos. All is but mental construction. All is but mental construction. So when we ring the bell, we ring it to this rhythm. So literally it means if one wishes to know all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, the Chinese is the Buddhas of the 3 times. And then there's a pause in the ringing, because that's when we say to ourselves, all is but mental construction. He should perceive that the Dharma Dhatus are all experience in this realm, are constructions of the mind. So we don't ring the bell then, and then we say, all to all Buddhas, all Buddhas, and we hit the gong many times, and then we end with Amitofo, which is represents a Buddha, one of the Buddhas of all time, who is the representation of the mind being totally free from suffering and living in a pure mind state, a pure land, no negative karma. So this is how we ring the bell. This particular verse is recited by the Bodhisattva, whose name is Forest of Awareness Bodhisattva. Oh, this is very unusual. Why would this Sattva's name be Forest of Awareness? And then I read the whole chapter leading up to that, and there are many bodhisattvas, and all of them start with the same name, forest. Forest of this, forest that, forest that. No Forrest Gump, though. Lin forest. So I thought, oh, what is this meaning? Why is there this forest? And going more deeply into the study, I found a teaching which is called Entry Out into Wandering in the Forest. Interesting, right? Because I'm very interested in how the mind wanders, and I want to get out of this wandering, and here it is in the forest. So, what causes us to get lost in our wandering? First is we get lost in what we would call wandering afflicted. This is where we're afflicted by the 5 desires, the senses. So when we're sitting, instead of being able to focus on our object of concentration, the mind wanders, and we're afflicted by all this, oh this, oh this. Always the mind seeking some kind of sense-based desire, and we see the mind wandering there. This is the first stage. The second stage is wandering lost in the forest. So that the person knows that there's a path, but they don't know where the path is. So they're looking for the path. Now, if you've ever wandered in the forest and you don't know where the path is, you know how easy it is to get tired? Very easy to get tired. It takes a lot, maybe even like in a jungle, you're walking through the jungle and you're trying to cut your way through. You get tired very quickly. In comparison with if the path is clear and you know where you're going, you're walking along the path not so tired. Many times I'm with people and I'm teaching them meditation, and they sit down and it's in the middle of the day and they start to practice, they fall asleep right there within just a couple of minutes, or they become very drowsy. Because the mind, it's not like that this person didn't get enough sleep or that they're sick. Those are also things that can cause a person to be sleepy. But in this case, it's in the middle of the day, they've gotten a good night's sleep, they're not sick, but their mind falls asleep. Because there's no way to cut through into a path. There's no path. So the third way that people lose their energy in wandering is called the leaks. And I've given a talk on the leaks before, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is how the external world affects us so much that it floods in and we become exhausted by it. The events of the day or our life, such a drama, it tires us out. Or the things that we do, our ego is so attached to it that every time we do something, our ego is so attached, we lose energy that way. This is called the inflow and the outflow. The inflow, the external world comes into us and burdens us too much. The outflow, we do things and we're attached to it. That's a whole other time that we could be spending. So, because of time, I'm going to leave us with these thoughts of how it is that the mind wanders and how we want to become awake. Being awake means learning how to focus our mind so that when it wanders, we're able to bring it back. Eventually, it doesn't wander so much, and then we have clarity. We know the path, and we can practice more easily, less suffering. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free attachment, aversion,